Seja bem-vinda, Margarita.
Obrigada, Margarida.
Gracias in español.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And it is welcome in Portuguese, though my Portuguese is not very good. And today is Monday, February the 13th in 2017. And we're here at Louisville Convent in Woodland Hills, California, to chat with you about your ministry in Brazil.
And we have a Margaret interviewing a Margaret.
So yes, we do.
A Margaret interviewing a Margie. So
and we are the only two Italians in the community, too.
Margaret Fitzer, yes.
Yes. Anyway, your story, which is very interesting, began in 1946 in the Bronx, New York, with your large Italian extended family, many of whom in the mid-50s moved to the West Coast, to California, in search of better employment opportunities. Your parents and three brothers settled in the San Fernando Valley, Los Angeles, California. Do you have any memories of those early years, Margie?
Well, actually, I was only 6 years old, and I do have some faint memories of New York, especially the snow and all the clothes you had to put on to go out to the snow. And I do have a faint memory of one of our houses that I lived in. At that time, I had my one older brother and a younger brother. The third brother was actually born in California. That was a very good memory. And we traveled by plane. My father and his brothers all scouted a year or so before and needed some new employment. So they then invited the women folk out. My father's sisters stayed in New York, so we still had connections with New York. But it was very exciting, even though I was only 6. I do remember parts of it. And the only thing I do remember, too, is that when we finally settled in the San Fernando Valley, after a short time with my aunt and uncle in Glendale, the San Fernando Valley was a very different picture from what I remember of New York and the buses and the metro system and the busy big city. It was very country-like. We were out in the middle of nowhere. In fact, my relatives called it the sticks. Why are you moving out to the sticks? It would be like the bush in Africa. But it was, I think, harder for my parents, especially my mother, who was used to Broadway shows and the subway, and getting around San Fernando Valley in those days was not easy for her. And she finished learning how to drive. She had driven a little bit. And it was kind of boring because New York City life is very different. But I did like the country atmosphere. I liked the alfalfa field and the pumpkin fields and the wide open spaces that are no more in Canoga Park. I enjoyed my time a little bit in public school, Canoga Park grade school, waiting to get into Catholic school. And I enjoyed mostly 7th and 8th grade in Our Lady of the Valley. That was very, very nice. I used to be able to walk to school and walk back. So that was a nice experience to be able to walk in those days and not fear, for any other violence in the streets or whatever happens today, unfortunately. And I did consider the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet when I was in grade school in Our Lady of the Valley. My vocation, though, I have to back up even more, because it was something my father used to mention every once in a while, because one of his sisters, elder sisters, wanted to be a sister, a religious nun, and she was not allowed to be. Even though she ran away one time to join the convent, she was brought back by her father, my grandfather. And he did mention it once in a while. I even have a picture of myself 3 years of age under the Christmas tree with a nun doll. So it was kind of a gentle little reminder every once in a while that he would be very proud if I did have a religious vocation. But until I actually entered into high school in 1960, the new high school, Louisville High School.
Why don't you talk a little bit about those early days
of
Louisville High School?
I was actually supposed to be going to another Catholic high school, and my girlfriends in grade school were all talking about this brand new high school. So I decided, no, I think I'd like to go with my girlfriends. I'd feel more secure. And hardly any of them were going to the other schools that were in the area. So my parents said okay, and they came up to Louisville at that time. And my mother and father met Sister Ronan, Mother Ronan at the time, and she showed us the area behind this ranch house here where the school was going to be built. And at that time, there was absolutely nothing there but wide open spaces and horse stalls, just horse stalls in an old building. But I can't believe my father's faith in Mother Ronan and my mother's faith as well to believe that there was going to be a high school. Well, there was a high school. When it was time to actually start school in September of 1960, there was part of the high school, just a very small building. We didn't have desks. We all had one chair. And we had to come up to the convent to use the bathrooms at times and to have a snack because the water outlets and everything were not really all set up yet. But school began, and that was very, very
That must have been an
exciting.
exciting experience. How many were in that first class with
We
you?
were about, I think we started out maybe with 90-something, but then graduating we were down to 62. It was very exciting, very good 4 years. And I have to thank my 8th grade teacher, who, Sister Ann Dorothy, I think her name was. She helped me get ready for high school because I wasn't the most studious person on some of those entrance tests. But she spoke up for me, and I happened to make the honor roll for the first 2 years of Louisville High School. So I was very glad about her help. And what I think I remember most of all is the kindness and the lightness of the Sisters of St. Louis. I remember Trina, I remember Sister Mary Paul, Maura Byron, Mother Ronan. They were very stiff in their big, huge TV habits, but underneath they were wonderful. They were wonderful women. And I really liked their personality. They were Irish. There was a thick Irish brogue at the time, but that didn't really, I don't really remember that bothering me at all. It was fine. But I do remember their kindness and their humor. They were very patient too with us and did so much to make us feel at ease those first years of a new high school. I actually at this point had been thinking already, even in grade school, to be a missionary. So when they started talking in my junior year of a religious vocation, we had several orders from different congregations come and talk to us in high school. But our sisters never really talked about vocations, and they never even mentioned, except for one day when I happened to mention that I wanted to be a missionary and that I was writing to Marino sisters in New York, that they finally piped up. And I remember to this day in the administration office at the front of the school there, Mother Ronan and Sister Mary Paul, Maura Byron, standing there and looking at me and saying, "Oh, but we will be going to the missions, and we hopefully will be going to the missions in South America." Little did I know this was a very, very remote possibility at that time. But I kind of believed them, and I said, well, to my mother and father, said, I don't know any Marino people, and I don't particularly, have anything familiar with them, so maybe it would be good just to try out the Sisters of St. Louis. So I did, and in 1964, right after high school, I decided to join the novitiate. I knew nothing about a novitiate. I knew nothing about sisters. Some of my girlfriends in high school were trying to tell me, oh, there's going to be great silence. You're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have to, wear funny clothes. And all of that just did not seem to bother me at the time.
Who else entered with you from that first class?
We had, actually, that was another stimulus because one day, I remember Sister Trina had a whole pile of envelopes. And she said, come over here, Margie. So I went over, and she says, just to make you feel at ease, I want to show you some other of your classmates who are thinking of entering with us as well. So she started showing me the envelopes. I could see Patty Brunton, Kristen Schlichty, Diane Wright, Patty Conniff, all these people that were my friends during high school. And I said, my goodness, because we did not talk among ourselves. We didn't want people poking fun of us or talking it down or whatever. So until that day, I really wasn't sure. And I'm sure she did that with the other students as well. So when it came time, one of my best girlfriends, Nancy Redmond, was, but then she backed out at the last minute. She did come for a couple of weeks, but then backed down again. So that was a great stimulus, and it was an exciting time. I'm a girl in a family, the only daughter, with 3 brothers, so the fact of having other girls around, and that's why I loved the girls' high school, Louisville, for 4 years, and the fact of having my girlfriends follow me into religious life was a plus as well.
How were your parents with that choice?
My parents were very, very happy. I think they liked the idea. My mother says, well, you know, you're just down the street. You can come back anytime you want, and that made me feel okay, which is true. It was very close to the convent. We were just maybe 5 miles away, I think.
Uh-huh.
So that was very interesting, very good. So they were very much in favor of it. My father much more, I'd say, than my mother, because my mother giving up an only girl is not easy. And so for the time being, I forgot Marino, and I forgot all of that. The beginning years of the novitiate, besides
what was that like for you?
Yes, besides the girls from high school, my girlfriends, my classmates, 6 girls came from Ireland. They were a year younger than we were, and they had done some pre-novitiate in Ireland, and they were going to be in our same group. So eventually we were 12. Then we actually went up to 15 at one point and then dropped down to 12 again. So those girls coming from Ireland was a wonderful experience. They entered actually a week ahead of us. And it was wonderful getting to know them. They were in a new culture. I'd almost say a new language, because our English was very different. We had a laugh at each other, the way we said things and some of the vocabulary we'd use for the same object. But they were very good days, very, very good days. So it was good. The 3 years in novitiate were a very wonderful experience. I was very happy also with the education we got during those novitiate years in Bible and different other aspects of catechetical studies. We also did some outreach by going to the Motion Picture Hospital on the weekends and visiting the patients there. We walked to and from the hospital, and that was a wonderful experience, meeting some of these men and women who had been in some of the silent movies projects, and getting to know them. I actually met one of the men who helped train Rin Tin Tin.
You better tell people who Rin Tin Tin is.
Rin Tin Tin was a German Shepherd dog who had a program on television. It was very, very good.
And you have
Cowboy,
a
Western.
fondness for dogs,
And I have a
you?
fondness for dogs, yes. But, and the sisters here in the convent, at the time, we were, I think, in total about 30 sisters between the novitiate and the senior sisters, we call them. And, you know, some of those were the sisters who had taught me, the teachers in high school. But it was difficult because we weren't allowed to really talk with them. That I found hard, because after 4 years of teaching, I wasn't able to actually talk too much with them at that time. We were kind of kept separate. And we had some other interesting experiences. And then before we even could think about it, we were launched into some early teaching experiences.
I was going to ask you about those early experiences.
I was fortunate to be able to go to El Monte, which is one of our first founding convents here and school, to do 2 years teaching. And I was a little lost at the beginning, but the sisters there in El Monte, especially Teresa Markey and Rita McCormick, they were very patient, and I learned a lot from them. And later I did a little bit of classes experience of Sister Miguel O'Reilly in her kindergarten, which also helped me manage my second grade. So that was good. It was very different from the novitiate. I just remember how tired I'd be around 4 o'clock in the afternoon after a full day of school, and especially in the beginning, not knowing exactly what I was doing in my second grade. But then everything started evolving, and it got better and better. And I loved the children. I loved the school. Most of the students at that time were Latino. Now it is much more diverse in El Monte. Then after that, I got a year to study in college.
I do remember that. You left and I got there.
Yes.
I went to El Monte.
Yes, I put a dog in that convent. That was one of my first dogs I put in the convent.
And I got to take care of that dog.
And his name was Monty,
Yes.
German Shepherd, beautiful German Shepherd. Then I had a year at Louisville where I studied at Mount St. Mary's. And then we were able to gather some of the wonderful experiences of the Sisters of St. Joseph in Mount St. Mary's, and I loved my studies there, especially the social studies. I really excelled in social studies, and the arts. I loved that as well. And history. I was never good at history, but I enjoyed the history of, in those classes. Then I had another year of teaching experience in Malibu, Our Lady of Malibu. That was very good, very difficult, first grade there. Team taught with another young lay girl. She was a lovely, lovely woman. And that was good. And then my third year of teaching was in Our Lady Refuge, Long Beach.
So you're 1 year in each of those places?
I was 2 years in El Monte, 1 year studying, 2 years in Malibu. And then I think I came back for 1 year study again, and before I went to Our Lady of Refuge, or something like that. But I did have actually 2 years of college consecutive classes. Then during teaching, the years that we were teaching, we had to go to school, go to college classes after school, sometimes in the evening, most Saturdays, and then during the summers. So that was a long haul. It took me 10 years to get my BA degree.
I can relate to that.
Yes, yes. But it was good. It was very, very good. And along the way, I still had the seedling of wanting to be a missionary. And I kept that alive at all the assemblies because we would talk about, the future and what was going on, and I'd always pop up my hand and say, but you got me here under a little bit of false pretense. I don't see us moving to go to South America. And so for 10 years, when those assemblies would come around, myself and 2 other sisters, Kathleen Meyer and Joan Kavanagh, the 3 of us would pipe up and say, what's happening about the South America Foundation? So
in 1976, your long waiting and patience finally resulted in the opportunity to go to the first mission in Brazil. Can you tell me how it felt when you heard that that was a decision, and that you and Catherine Foley and Maura Clerkin, who's in your same novitiate class, were chosen from the 13 who had initially volunteered, and instead of a missionary assignment to Latin America, which you had envisioned, Peru or Colombia, the congregational choice was for Brazil. What was that whole experience like, hearing the news, hearing who was going, and it was going to be to Brazil?
Well, I forgot to tell you that during high school and college, I took Spanish.
To get ready for South America.
To get ready for Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, any of those Latin countries in South America, Spanish-speaking countries. And then to see what happened with that decision of the congregation, I can remember the letter going up on the refrigerator door in Our Lady of Refuge. I was still teaching in Our Lady of Refuge when that notice came. And 13 of us actually volunteered. And then I heard that I was one of 3 and that it was Brazil. And I never forgot that. I could still see the note on the refrigerator, and I said, "Oh my goodness, that is not Spanish, that is Portuguese." And I remember in college, one of our professors, who was our Spanish teacher, he loved Portuguese. He was actually a Portuguese speaker, actually a Portuguese teacher. And he would interject lots of times Portuguese instead of Spanish. And I remember saying, "Oh, I wish he had done it more." But I thought, well, I have the root word, the vocabulary will help, but I'll never forget that. And another thing I'll never forget is calling my mother at the time. I think my father was at work, so I got the phone on the phone. I got my mother on the phone, and I said, "Okay, Mom, I'm going to Brazil, South America. It's all your fault." And she said, "What? Well, you've been complaining about it all your life. It serves you well." And I have to actually go back again because some of the missionary vocation I got because my mother had always ordered an subscription to Merino magazines, which were those little Merino magazines that were always sitting in a basket in our bathroom. So I'd always
reading room.
That's the best reading room. So I said, "Mom, it's your fault with the Merino magazines in the bathroom all the time." Then another missionary desire grew from the experiences we had in Tijuana. Every time relatives would come from the East Coast, we would go to maybe Disneyland or Tijuana or someplace, to show them around.
Do you want to explain where Tijuana
And
is?
Tijuana is south of the border here. It borders San Diego, which is about 3 hours from Los Angeles. And I just remember having such good experiences in Tijuana at the time. But I do remember one time we were walking and over a bridge, and we saw the dry river bed full of cardboard boxes, big, huge cardboard boxes. And I saw children running around, and I said to my mother, "Oh, there's some children playing in the boxes down there." And she said, "They're not playing, they live there. That's their home." I said, "What?" It was my first big introduction because San Fernando Valley at that time was very white, very low to middle class, society. I don't think we ever saw even black people, or we did see Hispanics because I loved my tacos and the taco stands. But I never had seen poverty to that extent. I did in the Merino magazines because that's where I saw a lot of poverty, especially in South America. So that never, ever, I could almost paint that picture because that stayed with me a long time. And I thought, well, is there something I could do? Because I loved children. I did love teaching. And I thought, well, maybe, something can be done, and I would like to try. So that's really where some of my little bit of missionary vocation came from. But it was exciting. I was not nervous. I was not scared. I was not dreading being homesick. I guess God follows along with us, and his providential care gives us the strength and the generosity and the calmness we need when it is right for us. I remember getting ready for Brazil. I remember getting, all the information I needed, and remember my parents coming to the airport late because they got trapped in traffic that morning, and they actually let my mother and father on the airplane. We were already on the airplane ready to take off, and they actually let them in to say goodbye.
Oh my goodness.
Because they missed us while we were waiting in LAX. That would never be done today. But they did let my mother and father on the plane. So it was exciting. And then the long flight, we landed in Brasilia, and the bishop, Don Jaime Collins, who was an Irish Redemptorist, was there, looking down from the airport. It's a small airport. It's a little larger right now. And saw us coming and welcomed us. And then we took the about 2.5 hour drive to Goiânia. Beautiful, beautiful. It was the rainy season. It was the end of November. We decided to go down after Thanksgiving, so I had a lovely Thanksgiving get together with my family. One of my brothers also helped host a going away party for Catherine and Maura and I in his house, Michael, and we had a lovely going away party here. So the greenness of Brazil at that point, I think, reminded Catherine and Maura of Ireland. And just rolling hills and hardly any towns or anything between Brasilia and Goiânia at the time. I think at the most it might have been 2 small towns. It has grown up a lot now, but it was amazing to see the wide open green spaces.
Could you say a little bit about those first years in Brazil, some of the experiences, learnings, what you did, the stories that you've shared many times with us?
Well, it was fortunate that we had an Irish Redemptorist bishop sponsor us. I think when Sister Catherine Foley came and scouted South America, she did go to Peru and Ecuador and Colombia, but she had connections with the brothers of some of our sisters, 2 of them. Joan Kavanagh's brother was in Brazil, and he was a Redemptorist, and Teresa McMahon's brother was already in Brazil, a Holy Ghost priest. So those connections, I think, helped Catherine familiarize herself a little more with Brazil than the connections we would have had in Peru and Colombia and Ecuador. So I think that was kind of a helping and deciding factor. Also, she was asked to go up to the boondocks, the interior of Brazil, and when she landed, all she could see were grass shacks, which it was Mirasema, around the airport especially, tiny little airport with a dirt runway. And she in her lace sleeves and blouse and suit felt completely out of sorts. But I think the warmness of the Irish Redemptorist priests really helped her have an affinity to maybe that's what the Lord was leading us to. And in the end, it was fortunate. I think, looking back, I think there would have been a wonderful connection with Spanish-speaking Latin America because of Southern California. But I wouldn't trade it now because I think the church was so much alive and so progressive. We had wonderful bishops in Brazil at the time. And that, I think, experience was a lot richer than even the language. And the Portuguese, it took a while, but it finally stuck. And also to have the Irish Redemptorist priests who spoke English helped us a lot too, because there was nothing around the area we actually settled in the first couple of years. To get away, you would have to take like a 14 to 17-hour bus ride because there was no big cities or towns around. So your social your social getaway would have been very limited. So just getting together with the Irish Redemptorist priests on the weekends, sometimes we didn't actually work with them. They were in different areas, different communities. But we would get together and we were able to learn a lot from them and a lot from the other sisters who were in the area as well. We had the Sisters of Notre Dame, we had the Assumption Sisters, we had the Spiritano Sisters who were just wonderful. We would go and spend time with them. And in fact, our very first night in Brazil, we were with the Franciscan Sisters of Mater Dolorosa. And they had a big, huge convent and retreat house. It was actually their novitiate too. And that night at dinner, the very first night of dinner in Brazil, we were Irish, American, Italian, German, and Portuguese, Brazilian. We were 5 different cultures that very first night. So that was just wonderful.
Could you talk a little bit about the language school and the estagios, the living experiences that you had with the people?
Yes, the language school was a wonderful experience. After we arrived in late November, December, and in January, mid-January, we went down to Goiânia on the way to Rio de Janeiro. Now, we had our CENFI, which would be the language school, the Center for Intercultural Language. It was in Rio de Janeiro, the famous Rio de Janeiro. It is a beautiful city. It was even more beautiful in those days and less violent. We were together with 65 other missionaries, priests, sisters, lay people, and 15 different nationalities. So it was the Tower of Babel. Those first couple of weeks, we were fortunate to have a Filipino priest who spoke English take the English group, because we were a pretty big English group. We were Americans and Irish and Canadian. He helped us those first couple of weeks because none of us had Portuguese, none of us. I had 1 sentence in Portuguese.
What was your sentence?
It was getting to know somebody, and you'd say, prazer de conhecer-lhe, happy to meet you. So that's about the only sentence I had. In the Spanish, of course, wouldn't work. But it was wonderful that he was able to take us for those 2 weeks and help interpret and be the interpreter between all the other cultures there. And we all had our different speeds. We had different classes. Sometimes we would get tired of the class because it was very tiresome to hear a language you didn't understand. A lot of the culture and history of Brazil and South America was given in speeches, talks, but in Portuguese. So you'd sit there and you'd get maybe every other 10th word. That's about all. Then we had, regular dialogue classes, which was, hello, how are you? I'm fine. Where are you from? I'm this, I'm that. But it took a while for all that to sink in. So we'd get tired and we'd gather a few of us together, like 4 or 5. And we would go to the beach, Copacabana Beach.
So you learned your Portuguese on the beach?
We learned our Portuguese on the beach, yes. We decided that we were just too tired and too exhausted, and our heads were too full, so we'd go down to the beach, or we'd go to a movie, an English movie, and it was great. Social life was wonderful during those
I'm gathering
3 or 4 months in the language school.
Sounding like fun as well as hard
and
work.
At the very end of the language school, we were in tears because we got to know each other so well, and we didn't want to face what we had to face wherever we were going.
How long was the language school,
From
Margie?
3 to 3.5, 4 months.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So it's a long enough time for you to get to know people. And we were very, very sad. Then we went to Sao Paulo for a month just to acclimatize ourselves to what Sao Paulo, the big metropolis, is like another New York. It was completely different than Rio de Janeiro. Rio de Janeiro's climate is milder. Sao Paulo was freezing. This would have been in late May, June, and it's the winter, and nobody told us that. So we had to borrow the Holy Ghost. They'd let us borrow their socks and some of their jackets, and we had to go out and buy clothes. It was freezing. Nobody had prepared us for that. And we stayed a little time with the medical missionary sisters and the Holy Rosary sisters. So that was exciting in itself, because in Los Angeles, we would stay in our own schools with our own sisters, and yes, there would be intermingling with some courses and catechism and different things that went on in the archdiocese, but the mingling in Brazil was so much wider. It was wonderful, the intercongregational mingling with other religious orders and also lay people. So that was a wonderful experience. So then after a month in Sao Paulo and all that experience, we headed back to the north, which was Miracema do Norte, where we actually began. We stayed there for a couple of months when we first landed in the north. And we were still not in our first foundation. The first foundation was only going to be opened the August of 1977. So we are back in Miracema do Norte, where the bishop had his residence and where the Irish Redemptorists would gather, although they were in several towns around Miracema. Miracema is a beautiful little town along the river Tocantins, and the bishop had built a large training center for lay leadership and pastoral leadership courses. And that's where we actually stayed, in one of the little apartments there. And when we got back up in July, the terrible heat, it's the hottest, it's actually hot, dry time of the year, but it was a good change from the cold of the Sao Paulo at that point, the cold of the winter. The center was lovely, a lovely place to be while we were waiting for our convent to be finished in Barholanja. Barholanja would be approximately maybe an hour and a half south of Miracema. And it was all dirt roads. The only paved road was the federal highway. But we were happy to be back in July, but then we still missed our fellow classmates of the language school. And remember, our language was still very, very limited. We had one of the Assumption sisters who spoke English very well, Sister Regina. She's just a lovely person, and she helped us along in those few weeks there. And we also split up, the three of us split up, Catherine Moore and I, and we each went to a different little town and stayed in a different convent with different religious sisters. There were at least 3 or 4 different orders in the area. And that was a very difficult experience because I was with the Palatine sisters and they spoke Portuguese very, very quickly. And I didn't understand a word that was being said. So it was kind of like a depressing time of our beginning years. And I remember taking an English novel with me and trying to hide in my little bedroom. They had little tiny areas that they had. They didn't have a big convent. It was a small little convent. So they had just little areas where they walled it off for a bedroom. Like you can hear everything between the walls. And I tried to stay there and with my English novel most of the times but they would always come finding me and try to get me out and talk to the neighbors and take me to the church and take me to meet some of the Brazilian people in the little town. And I was just, always so sad. That was my first week. At the end of the first week, one of the Redemptorist priests came by, and he was coming in from another town, which was about 3 or 4 hours on a very, very bad road. And he would stop in and say hi to the sisters. And I recognized that he was Irish Redemptorist, an English speaker. It was my first introduction to him, Martino, his name was. And he saw how miserable I was. And he said, "Would you like to come to Miracema with me tonight, and I'll bring you back in the morning?" I said, I'd love to get out of here. But one of the sisters, one of the elder sisters, the superior of the Palatines, decided she'd come with us because she didn't want to, act like she kind of came like a chaperone or whatever. And this Martina was like 10 years older than I was. But anyway, so she came along, but then we finally settled her in her little apartment at the training center. And when we knew she was in her apartment, we went over to the bishop's residence, and we had a wonderful time. And I got to speak English the whole night, and then he brought me back the next day, and I was much better the second week. I had just got over that hump of being very shy and coy and not wanting to open my mouth and try the Portuguese.
That's a little
But
hard to believe,
it
Margie.
was it was a very, very hard time. But you have to go back to being a child, and you don't know what's going on because of the culture. You don't know what people are saying. You don't know how to come back and say anything or ask a question. We had it because of the language school and the study that we did, but you understand a little bit sooner than you start speaking, and it was just trying to get over that. And splitting us up was good because you have to get immersed. You can't hear the English language because then you keep going back to it. But that was wonderful, and then we opened the first foundation in Barholanja. The people have a wonderful ritual there. When a new foundation is open, they all get in their cars and trucks, and they meet you halfway. So the people in their cars and trucks would come, and they would meet us halfway from Mirsema to Barholanja, and we would stop halfway through and get out and greet all the people, and then they would usher us in to the little town and into our new little convent. It was a wonderful ritual and a loving experience, and it was just packed with the people from the towns around, and also the sisters. We had 3 or 4 or 5 different religious orders there. So it was a lovely thing for them to celebrate our coming, celebrate our foundation.
It's heartwarming to hear that.
It's very heartwarming.
It's a very integrated and welcoming community.
It was. So I was there in Barholanja for about 4 years before I went to Colmeia. But just before that, after first 10 years in Brazil, it gets exhausting and you need a little bit of a break. So I was able to do a sabbatical. And in 1987, I think it was 87 to 88, I was privileged to do a sabbatical up in Oakland, California. Actually, I had come from Colmeia, because after the 4 years in Barholanja, I went up to Colmeia and opened that foundation with our sisters. Judy and I and Carmel Mary opened that second foundation. And then I had the 10-year sabbatical. My sabbatical was in Creation Spirituality. Matthew Fox, who was a Dominican priest, wonderful, wonderful course. I look back now and really understand where a lot of our charism and our the motto of Louis Bottin, a world healed, unified, and transformed. At the time, that was not in my mind, but now when reflecting back, the course, Creation Spirituality, was all of that and more. It also took in the Bible from a whole different aspect. It took in feminism, which was wonderful. It took in art, which was just up my line because I did art in high school and college, and I exceeded in it, and I loved it. And I did art with the children in school when we were doing arts and crafts as well. So Creation Spirituality brought so much to my mind and prepared me so well for all the eco-spirituality we're hearing today. Matthew Fox, I think, and that Creation Spirituality course was way before its time. We were talking about ecology and climate change. We were talking about all of these things way back in 1987, and it was mind-boggling. It was a wonderful, wonderful course. Some very excellent physicists and scientists were some of our teachers. Brian Swim. We had Thomas Berry, who came and spoke with us, and it really opened my mind and also my heart for the years to follow. And I had something that really meant something to me. The biggest thing is when I started reading some of the Creation Spirituality books, it was the whole thing about not original sin, not the negative all the time, but it was original blessing, that we came from a God who saw the good in us, not the original sin, not the negative in us. And the original blessing is that we began with that blessing. It began on a positive note. When I was reading the material from Creation Spirituality, it was something that resonated with me that I had always thought about, but I never could put it in words or thoughts. And I always was skeptical about some of the things I was listening to in catechism and in religion classes and the Bible that didn't make sense to me. It didn't show me the face of God that I knew existed. And that's why I, to this day, Creation Spirituality has been one of the biggest foundations that has wonderful connections with, later on, our charism, our motto, our envisioning of our founders. When we were in the novitiate, a lot of our books on charism and our foundation and our founders were not written, were not studied as much as they are today. A lot of that study came in I think in the late 70s and 80s, and I had already been in Brazil. So a lot of that, is
You missed out on.
missed out on, and also missed out on, but I was getting it in a different vein from a missionary perspective and from my sabbatical. So that was wonderful.